Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during this presentation, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the May 18th edition of Crop Talk. This week, we're going to start off with talking about some of the issues that are facing most of the producers throughout the province right now, and getting the crop in the ground is probably the biggest thing is a problem we're having, and a lot of producers are faced with delayed seeding. So I thought it'd be a good chance to get a few people on and talk about maybe some of our options, talk about maybe things we should or shouldn't do as we're approaching the middle to the end of May here and getting some of the crop in. So we're going to start with that, and then after that we've got the crop scouting panel, and we're going to answer some of the questions that have come in this week. But before we get into that, I thought there was, now that we're doing the crop reports and the information is coming out, I thought it would be good maybe just to bring up a slide and show where we are compared to where we were last year and what our 5-year average is. So as you can see, we're about 4% completed seeding right now, which is definitely behind our 5-year average, and I guess that's why we're getting a lot of concerns from producers as to how we're going to get the crop in and how fast we can get the crop in. Weather conditions are variable across the province right now. Talking this morning, we're getting rain in the western side of the province. You go to the north and it's maybe not raining as much. And some areas are having sunny skies, and then as you get more towards the valley, I think they're forecasting for later on today, but the next 2 to 3 days here isn't going to be great for getting back out into the field. So we did get producers that were going yesterday and some the day before yesterday. So I think that 4% is probably going to be a little bit higher than it is, but guys were just nice to getting started, and then this morning we've got rain. So I guess with that, I just wanted to give a little update from the crop report. The crop report is online, so if you want to go and read the whole report, it's there. There's a lot of good information in there, and just go and check that one out. So what we'll do now is we're going to get Dennis Lang on, and Dennis Lang is going to talk a little bit about pulses and delayed seeding of the pulse crops and things to look for.
Good morning, Lionel. We're just going to go full screen here. Just give me a second here. It's not. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So seeding pulses and soybeans on wet and late spring. So been getting a few questions on that this year about what some of the I guess things that we should really think about when we're doing this year. One of the first things I guess we need to look at, plant your pulse and soybeans based on field conditions and what they allow to do. So if that means you need to plant your soybeans because that ground is ready before the ground is then your peas, that's what you need to do. It's a later season all the way around, and I think the bigger choice this year is you don't want to muck things in the ground. If a field that you have scheduled for a certain pulse crop or any crop is ready to go, but it's maybe, you have other crops that you'd like to plant before that, I think with the season that we have this year, I think you take advantage of what you can. In my area here in southern Manitoba, I had a grower planting soybeans last week. It was going into sunflower ground, and it's the only field in probably about 20 miles that was good to go. But it was really doing a really nice job, actually, surprisingly enough. So, even though temperature is a little cooler, I think we need to get this in the ground. Things like peas, for example, there's been questions about switching peas out, once we get to that mid-May period. I've kind of looked over some of the crop insurance data, and on most years, it does make sense to plant your peas early, planting in late April, early May, because we have earlier seasons those years. This year we're later, and when I looked at some of the data from crop insurance, that's been collected over the years. And on years when seeding is later or delayed, those yields in that 3rd and 4th week still hold their own yet of May. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you're planting your peas, plant them in May. If you're getting to that last couple of days of May and into June, well, then you got to start looking at other alternatives then. So even though that crop insurance deadline is, in mid-June, and I'll cover that a little bit later. As far as soybeans go, I haven't had a lot of questions about growers switching varieties to go to an earlier season variety. Part of the reason for that is a lot of growers are picking varieties based on their maturity zones. So if you're out west, you're not growing something that's suited for southern Manitoba. And if you're in southern Manitoba, as long as, we have a lot wider window for planting here, longer growing season here for these beans to mature. So sometimes the longer season varieties will still work here, even planting in, the last week of May type of thing. So if you are looking at changing varieties, those growers in areas where they may have chosen a variety that was too long to start with, and would work on, most years if you get a weather that cooperates for you. But when you start getting into that last week of May and you're growing a long season variety, there I would suggest maybe talking to your seed retailer and just see what the availability of some of those earlier lines are. There's a good selection in the Manitoba Seed Guide. It's based on maturity, and it gives you some really good yield results. Keep in mind, when you're looking at those, whether it's for Eastern, if it's an Eastern Manitoba that you're looking at, sometimes you'll see those early ones have a yield disadvantage to the longer season ones. But keep in mind that it's all in comparison to the Czech variety, which is a mid-season variety. So in the Eastern trials, even though a variety might be, might say it's 80% of the Czech, doesn't mean it's a poor variety. It means that based on growing that variety in Carmen under normal growing conditions, there is a yield reduction. However, if you're looking at something a little bit earlier because your zone is shortening up, then yeah, it might be a good option for you there. So, oops. There we go. Next slide here. Some of the other things when you're looking at seeding pulses into wet soil conditions, consider the use of a fungicide seed treatment, whether it's for the peas or for the soybeans. That will be beneficial in those cooler, wet soils. Keep your seedlings a little bit more healthy. Keep in mind your seeding rates and keep them high. This year we've had some issues with pea seed having lower germ and very dry seed. So you want to keep your plant populations up this year. So don't skimp on the seed, especially when into that cold, wet soil. Check your seeding depth. Don't plant any deeper than necessary for both peas and soybeans. Half an inch into moisture with the moisture that we have this year is good. You don't want to be going too deep because you don't want to be bringing up those clogs. Keep in mind that it's mid-May to late May that we're planting now. It's not mid to late April. So the ground is definitely going to warm up a lot faster now than what it would be if you were planting at the end of April. So getting into moisture, it'll come out of the ground probably a lot quicker than it normally would, even though temperatures are next week. I think we're in the 10 to 12 degree range, so not super warm, but we're also not looking at the minus temperatures here for next week in this region here, anyways. So those are kind of some of the things that really kind of keep in mind. And I'm going to keep hitting my enter button here, and it's here, there we go. Okay. So something else to kind of keep in mind, Manitoba Agricultural Services Corporation, their website is listed here. I've just picked out a couple of the crops that I deal with here and where the seeding deadlines currently are. For dry beans in Area 1, that's more in the south here, we're June 10th for full coverage. Area 2 is June 6th, as well as Area 3 and the experimental area June 6th. So again, we still have a little time for dry beans in those zones yet for full coverage. Field peas, we have till June 15th for full coverage, but as I said earlier, get the peas in May. Seeding peas in June, from some of the data that I've seen, really the yields can really drop off in June. In May, you might still be at 80 to 85% of the full yield potential yet in that last part of May, but with the season being shorter this year, things will be a little different than this year than other years. Okay, soybeans. This is a soybean insurance map that MASC has on their website. I'm just going to go to my pointer mode here and go to laser pointer. Okay, so Down here in the valley, Red River Valley here, our seeding deadline is June 6th. So we still have a little bit of time in there for full coverage, and the extended area goes up to June 11th after that. And that line is kind of just almost just north of Morris. Zone 2 here currently is May 30th. So keep those dates in mind as well when you're starting to push that limit a little bit. And then once you branch out from there, our deadlines still remain at that May 30th time period. But keep in mind that if you're growing, soybeans in the Swan River area, up in that more northern area, that's more in the zone 4 right now. There is no extended seeding deadline, so May 30th would be that deadline. What I'm thinking is going to happen moving forward here is where if we don't get too much rain this weekend, seeding has started to progress nicely down in this area here. Growers are still picking and choosing fields. There's still some flooded areas as well, so it's a little bit of a mix mash of everything going on here right now. But if we don't get that rain, I think seeding will progress dramatically over the weekend and be in full force next week in most areas. But the flooded areas is going to be a little bit more delayed. With that being said, a couple of things that I'll maybe turn it back to Lionel here, and if he has any questions for me, I'll turn it back to him right now. So.
Hey, Dennis, thanks. Yeah, there's been some questions come in, not just right now, but over the last day or so. And the one I think a lot of producers are asking is, how long can the peas stay healthy in the ground with wet feet? I guess the producer was asking me that he's planted some peas. He planted into wet soil, and now we've gotten rain for the last 2 days, and they're forecasting more rain for Thursday and Friday, cool weather conditions. And he's wondering how long his peas seed is viable in the ground before something starts happening to it.
Well, for the short term, I wouldn't be overly concerned with it. Things are just going to, hold their course, especially if they've had a seed treatment on there. That will definitely help. In my experience in the past with crops like soybeans, where growers are planted May 1st, and with no germination or very little germination, that seed is sat in the ground for, in some cases, up to 30 days before the stand starts coming up. With the more recent rains that you have here, that will put a little bit more stress on the crop. But one thing you have to really remember is that, yes, it's wet today, but we're going to hopefully get some warmer weather, and we are at the end of May, so things are going to warm up a little quicker. So I wouldn't, maybe in about 10 days or so, I would probably check to see what germination is like. But peas do germinate at a much lower temperature. They are a very tolerant crop when it comes to that too. So we'll just have to wait and see on that one, because this is a very unusual year that we have this year.
Okay, one of the other things he was asking was that the moisture or the water that the seed is going to take on when it's in the ground is going to be cold water, and he was wondering if that's going to have any effect on the seed.
I think short term, like that was something we have discussed with soybeans in the past as well. It's that imbibition chilling injury. We were able to see that in the lab when they do it in the lab, but we don't seem to see the same situation when we put it out to the field. Yeah, ideally, you'd want to, under ideal year, you plant the crop, you get some warm weather, everything comes up. But these things do come up. You got to have a little patience with these. So I'm not today. I wouldn't be overly concerned with it. In 10 days, if you're not getting a stand and the seed is starting to rot, then that would be something different. But I think for the the next 10 days here, I think you should be okay. So.
Okay, so in 10 days, what should I be looking for? Like a good root system or a sprout, or?
Yeah, well, just make sure everything's sprouted. When you dig up the seed, just see if you've gotten your shoots starting to develop already. If you're looking for something that is, well, if your seed is starting to rot in the ground, then that would be an issue for sure. But at this point, that seed stays in the ground a long time. I just, sometimes looking at the volunteer crops that come up at this time of the year too, and sometimes they're a lot harder than what we give them credit for. So unless they're submerged in water, that's the only difference. Now, if it's just wet ground, that's one thing. But if there's standing water on it, that's something different as well. So that would definitely affect the crop a lot more. and reduce the stand that you have emerge as well. So.
Okay, another producer asked, he's had seed that's been basically treated and ready to go on his truck for probably 5 days, 6 days. Any concerns about anything that's been done or the longevity of the treatments?
Well, I guess the first question is it a soybean crop or is it a pea crop?
It would be peas.
Okay, because there is a difference. Soybean, the longevity on soybean inoculant is a little longer on seed inoculant than what it would be for soybeans, or than would be for peas, I should say. So with peas, you know, if long as it's been stored under, been stored under cooler conditions, like not in the hot sun, 3 to 4 days still should be okay. You might have reduced a little bit of reduced nodulation because that is living bacteria. What I would also suggest though is when the grower's ready to plant, I would, if you're concerned with that, and I would probably suggest putting some granular inoculant down as well, because that granular inoculant has a much longer viability in the soil. We're probably talking, 35, 40 days, if not longer. It infects the roots later in the growing season. So that's kind of the advantage of having that granular inoculant along with the liquid on seed. The liquid on seed or the peat on seed, that is more short-lived. It's only for those early stages. So my best suggestion on that, if you're not going to be getting in the field for a couple of days, look at maybe potentially putting some granular inoculant down. But with that being said, if you're the bacteria that's found in soils in Manitoba for peas, it's naturally found here. So you might have slightly reduced nodulation, but there is some bacteria already in the soil. So again, to increase your odds, add the granular. But at the end of the day, if you don't have that option, I would still go ahead and plant if you get in the next couple of days. If it's going to be longer than that, then I would probably say maybe re-inoculate your peas if you could.
Okay, and a question just come in. What's your comments regarding rolling for this year? I guess it'll be peas or soybeans, but I'm thinking this one is for peas. So. Okay.
So for peas, first question, do you need to roll because of stones? That would be my first question. If you need to roll because of stones, the next question that needs to be answered is whether or not, sorry, I had a incoming call and I got distracted here for a second. The next question needs to be answered is what soil conditions are like. If you can roll and soil conditions are, if you want to roll and soil conditions aren't too wet, then I would say roll now. If you find that your soil conditions are too wet right now, what I would suggest doing is waiting until the start of that second to third node stage and roll at that time. You can roll peas once they're up, just roll them on the warm day. I saw peas roll last year on, and you couldn't even tell that they were damaged. So option one, roll in this spring if soil conditions allow. Option two, if soil conditions don't allow, then wait until that second to the third node stage on the peas.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And any other comments regarding regarding soybeans? And I guess the next thing that I'm going to be getting questions out here is there actually a choice in varieties, or do I start just I plan on not growing soybeans?
There are some companies I've talked to that do have earlier lines, but as I said earlier, if you've picked a mid to early season variety, and we'll talk for the West for now, if you've already picked that variety this year, I would feel very comfortable still planting those in May. When you start poking into June, then as long as it's the early to mid season, I think you're still okay. But if you felt more comfortable growing an earlier season variety, you want to reach out to your retailers and check with them on the availability, because not all varieties would be, not all companies have early season lines or any supply of, or large supply of those. So I would check around, but at this point, if you pick the right variety in the summertime, or in the wintertime, I should say, you should be fine.
Okay, just gonna do a quick check here to see if there's any other questions, and I think that's covered the ones that have come in, and good. So thanks, Dennis.
Yep.
We'll,
just a final comment. Anne was having some difficulty signing in, so if she's not there, she's going to keep trying, but that's where she's at. So.
Yeah, I was trying to work in that behind the scenes here, but yeah, no, thanks, Dennis. So Lori, how are we sitting with Anne? I wasn't able to get to bring up her slides. So is she there?
Yeah, she's there. I can unmute Anne, and you can just have your slide on, and Anne will be able to talk about her topic.
Great.
I will just hold on one second. Okay, Anne, there you go.
Yes, okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I'm had to get out to a field this morning, and my computer is just having problems connecting to the network right now. So I'll just talk about the slides that I had prepared. So just wanted to talk about some delayed seeding strategies for cereal crops. So just the first thing to point out is, we have been seeding very early the last few years. And based on crop insurance data, like seeding the 3rd week of May, for most crops, it's about an 80 to 85% of their relative yield for wheat, corn, barley, and oats. And then if we're going down to seeding the last week of May, that the average relative yield, ranges from about 66 to 67%. But it really depends so much on the growing conditions. And since we have seen so much earlier seeding last year, that may have, skewed some of those relative yields a bit as well. So Dennis mentioned a bit about seeding date deadlines. So for cereals for barley, oats, and spring wheat, the seeding date deadline is June 20th for all 3 crops with no extended seeding period. And I think that's just because we would expect that June 20th is definitely outside of the recommended seeding window for those crops, but seeding in early June could still produce some decent yields. For green corn, it's broken up into maps as well that you can access on the Masc website. But Area 1, the deadline is June 6th with an extended seeding period to June 11th. And then areas 2 to 4, so covering most of the province, the deadline is May 30th with extended seeding to June 4th. And then silage corn, the deadlines are a bit later as well. So June 15th for Area 1, May 30th for Area 2, and then extended deadlines to June 20th and June 3rd. So obviously some of the risks that we see of delayed seeding would be the increased risk of fall frost damage. And then another one which is so hard to predict is that increased risk of high daytime temperatures during those key periods of crop development. So if we think about how yield potential is determined in crops, we have to think about, how many heads per area, so how much tillering we see, the kernel number per head and kernel weight. And a lot of these is these can be affected by stress that the plants are experiencing and some of those growing season risks. So for example, if we do see really high temperatures during flowering, we can actually have more florid abortion, so less seeds per head, less corn kernels developing per cob as well. So, and then when we think about corn, if we are seeing more of that corn pollination during the highest temperatures, it's really most of a concern if we have high temperatures combined with that drought stress as well, which we actually have experienced the last few years. So it's also important to consider if we're going to be optimizing our seeding to make sure that we're doing everything, we're optimizing our seeding by planting really well. So if we think about if moisture conditions are good, we might want to be targeting the shallower end of what's recommended for seeding for crops, as that can result in faster germination, and then that might result practically in, say, like an extra 2 days of growth versus if you're seeding a bit deeper and that seed is taking longer to emerge. We also are seeing relatively cool soil conditions in various parts of the province because we have been seeing some cool nights. So it is important to consider, optimum germination temperatures for a variety of crops and planning crop sequence or having that impact crop sequence as well. One other thing to consider in terms of optimizing seeding is to consider adjusting seeding rates. So higher plant populations can also shorten time to maturity. So if we're having higher plant populations, we might be having less tillering and then more even maturity for harvest. And we also see a benefit to increase plant populations when yield potential is reduced. So in spring cereal crops like wheat, oat, and barley, we would expect that if your yield potential is lower, plants are not as good at accessing resources. So it's best to increase plant populations a bit as well. So I would definitely recommend targeting the higher end of the recommended plant populations in a late seeding situation. And then lastly, I think we do need to consider changing varieties or crop types. So it's a bit of a tricky situation. If we just think about spring wheat, oats, and barley, I have been contacting seed growers throughout the province, and there are supplies of some crops, but variety choice is fairly limited. So there are, supplies of seeds if people need them, if they're changing crop types, but there wouldn't really be a huge selection in variety if people are looking at changing to a smaller variety or to a shorter season variety, but that's definitely a consideration if people want to contact their local seed growers. And also for oats and barley, we do see a relatively narrow range in actual days to maturity based on Seed Manitoba data. So, barley about 86 to 91 days, oats 92 to 99 days. And then spring wheat, we do see for Canadian Western Red Spring and Canadian Northern Hard Red varieties, the maturity range would be about 96 to 102 days. But special purpose and soft white spring wheats can have much longer days to maturity. So it could be 6 more days to maturity. So that's a situation where you would want to maybe prioritize those Canadian Western Red Spring or Canadian Northern Hard Red varieties since they tend to be shorter season. And then for corn hybrids, it is a bit of I have contacted some of the seed companies as well, and there are some supplies of shorter season corn hybrids, and some have been moving into Manitoba in case farmers do need to switch. So the recommendation would be, like, if people are still able to seed corn early next week, I think it would be fine to just stick with the regular corn hybrid that you had originally planned. And then for a silage corn, that would be extended for about an additional 2 weeks. So for 2 more weeks, that people should just stick with what variety they planned on planting, as long as they had an appropriate corn heat unit for their area. But after, if for say grain corn, if we're not able to seed early next week, then farmers should consider switching to a shorter season variety. And Timmy Ojo from the Ag Weather Network had published some total accumulation of corn heat unit maps, and those were in the crop report yesterday, just showing the difference in total accumulation of corn heat units if the growing season is from May 1 to September 30th versus June 1 to September 30th. So if your corn gets in the ground, that 1 month shorter growing season reduces the total accumulated corn heat units across the province from 200 to about 300. So that could be the difference between having your variety mature and not mature. So just something to consider, and I recommend that people take a look at that map that Dane published in the crop report yesterday. So that's all I have, if there are any questions.
Hey, Anne, yeah, there's been a few come through here. I think one you answered regarding higher seeding rates, but there was a follow-up to it as to how much should we be increasing the seeding rate on wheat, oats, and barley?
I think it really depends what you typically plant. Like if you're already planting at the high end of the seeding rate, so say for wheat, you're already planting 28 to 31 or so plants per square foot, I think that's appropriate. If you're planting on the lower end of any of those recommended target plant populations, so say 23 or 20 plants per square foot, depending on the cereal crop, I definitely think people should be upping that then. So it just kind of depends where you normally fall. And that's a good reminder for people to, consider your 1,000 kernel weight and germination and your expected seedling mortality. So that's another consideration, is just to make sure that people are accurately calculating your seeding rates so you're ending up with a good target plant stand. And the Manitoba Ag Seeding Rate Calculator that was put up by the Farm Business Management team a few weeks ago is a great resource for that.
Okay. What about any comments on seed treatments? Is it more important now that we're seeding into these wet conditions?
I think it depends where you would be in the province. So like if we're seeding into warmer soil temperatures, the seeds should be popping up pretty quick, and seed treatments would be less recommended, or would be less necessary in my opinion. But if we are seeding into very wet soil conditions and you expect the seed to be sitting around a little bit longer, then seed treatments would be more recommended. It really kind of depends like how fast your soil is drying and how ideal the soil conditions are when you're planting. So I think Dennis made this point, but I think it makes a lot more sense to just wait an extra day and seed into better soil conditions than to be, I know it's hard because obviously the rainfall has been so, there's been so much rain recently that it is tough, but if we can plant into more ideal conditions, we should see better germination and emergence as well.
Okay, and one more question, and I guess this could be to you or to Dennis. Has there ever been a situation where MASC would provide the seeding date extension? We have not really lost much for growing weather this year yet, as it has been so cool. Any comments there?
Well, I'll just make a quick comment about for spring wheat, oats, and barley. I wouldn't anticipate there being a seeding rate date extension just because it is quite late to begin with at June 20th. For grain corn, I don't believe that there has been a seeding date extension in the past, or grain or silage corn, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And I know that this year MASC hasn't been looking into extending the seeding date deadline for corn.
Okay, and I'm not 100% sure if Dennis is still there, but yeah, again, my opinion is there in the past there has been some extensions, but I think with the reduced coverage extension that came into play, that kind of took care of a lot of the later seeding, like Anne mentioned about the seeding deadline of June the 20th is getting fairly late there as well. So. Thanks, Anne. That was some good information, and we will have your slides for the recorded webinar that will be going out to everybody.
Okay, thank you, and sorry about this issue connecting.
Not a problem, Anne. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the oil seeds now and go over some of the things we should be looking for or doing when we're trying to get the oil seeds in as fast as we can. I think everybody's mentioned it so far, but best seeding practice is probably still your best way to get the crop in. And just like Anne just mentioned, mudding it in is not an option, at least not an option right now. We are still into the nicely into the second, third week of May here. There's been several years in the past where we've been doing a lot of seeding from May long weekend till the end of May. We do have the ability to get the crop in fast, so I would say right now let's not get in too much of a panic. We still have maybe a good month to get the canola in. I would say that we definitely got 2 to 3 weeks for sure, and there has been lots of canola planted in June. Canola is a bit funny of a plant. It can actually adapt fairly well, and we usually get it maturing. Getting a later fall would be definitely a benefit, but it seems like canola can definitely adapt. And the biggest problem that we always are concerned with is whether it be a pulse crop or whether it be an oil seed, is that it's flowering during the heat of the summer, and planting now usually means flowering in that mid-July, and that's usually when we get our heat. And that's even Anne mentioned with the cereal crops, we could get some aborted flowers and reduce yield. The other thing is make a seeding plan right now as to where you can go, what fields you can get on, and Dennis had mentioned this, kind of plant where you can plant, and if it means right now bouncing around from crop to crop, you just need to do that. And if it means that you're going to look at making some changes, well then start making those decisions now, so you're prepared when we're ready to go and get the crop in. Again, I mentioned that canola can be kind of forgiving, so I think we can hold off a bit on it and try to get in some of the other crops that are a little more at risk. You know, I would, if you had full intentions of planting flax, I'd be looking at planting it, especially if the fields are ready before canola. I would get that in, because flax tends to be one of those crops that'll just keep growing and growing and growing in the fall. And so if we can get them in early, then they'll definitely have more time to mature in the fall. And this way you can they can reach more of their potential. So definitely look at making your decisions. You know, get your cereal crops in that, you know, require X amount of days. Get your flax in, your corn in, those types of crops that you know that you're going to need those days to get them to mature. And then get into the canola. There's definitely options for getting the canola seed in the ground. We've gone through this in years before where it's been too wet, and we've got a lot of innovative ways of getting canola seeded. Everything from floaters to Valmars and harrow bars to broadcasting and harrowing it in. Even rotary harrows have been used in the past. So, you know, we can get a lot of canola in a short period of time if wet conditions continue. I guess just a heads up, if you are broadcasting, and I even mentioned there aerial seeding, because we have seen canola being planted by planes, but it must be incorporated somehow mechanically before the seeding deadline, and must be fully established before you can get insurance on it. So if you're going to go to one of the untraditional ways of planting the crop, there are some stipulations for insurance. So make sure you're checking into that and following all the rules and guidelines to make sure that that crop will still be insurable. We did mention, or it has been mentioned about soil temperature, and I think that's something that's really important right now. The soil temperature has definitely gone up, and the crops will germinate fast and will definitely get growing faster. So I think that's something where is going to be in our favor when we do start getting these crops in the ground. And Dennis mentioned it as well. You know, 2-3 days, we'll see some of these crops starting to come up. Shallow seeding, again, is another important thing to be looking at, because again, the quicker the crop can get out of the ground and get established, the better. And I'm just checking here for if there's some extra questions that have been coming in. Okay, there's a few questions that have come in, and I think what I'll do is I'll address those to the panel, and so we're going to get started on the panel here right away. And a lot of seeding questions, a lot of disease questions started to come in, so I'm just going to head right into the panel right now. Yeah, so panel, crop scouting panel today. We're going to have a guest panel member, Timmy Auger, is going to be on, and Anne mentioned a bit about some of the stuff that Timmy's been getting for some questions, and so he's going to be a guest panel, and we're going to deal with that in a minute or two. But for one of the first questions that has come up is the importance of keeping on top of spraying, and I think Kim has been getting questions regarding this, and I think it's been addressed a bit by the crop coming up fast. So Kim, do you have some comments?
Yeah, I just had some comments there. Just things like late seeding and weeds, lots of moisture this year and lots of weeds. I mean, it's great to have the moisture. We've got a bit too much right now, but compared to the last few years, like we haven't seen this in a number of years now. And so I think we just have to be careful not to get caught because the fields are really greening up. I know it hasn't been that warm, but the weeds are really starting to come. And if you do a bit of a scrape back on the soil and, you know, you pull a little bit of that soil back with a shovel or a trowel or something, you can see there's a lot of weeds really starting to come. They're just not poking through the ground yet. But having said that, there are weeds out there if you're seeding, able to get seeding. You know, about skipping burn off, you need to prepare if you do skip a burn off before you get seeded, because it's important to get that crop in the ground, and you plan to get back on. This happens, guys get caught with this. Be prepared to get in there as quickly as possible. The crop will be up very quickly. We're talking about shallow seeding, and we're talking about lots of things to get that crop up and going quickly because we are seeding so late. So that gives you very little time to get in there with a burn off product. You have to be very careful. Certain products are only recommended pre-seeding, so really watch your label there. And also, you know, a burn off product, if there's any crop sticking up above the ground, you know, you just can't spray. So if you do miss that spray and you haven't got any weed control done on that field with that crop coming up, you know, ideally we don't want our weeds to get ahead of the crop. The difference in lost yield from one leaf behind the crop to one leaf ahead of the crop is huge. And there's some information in our guide at the front of the guide, or starting on page 44. I'm just looking at a table right now that's talking about the yield loss percent in wheat caused by wild oats. And if you had 20 wild oats per meter squared, if you divide a meter squared by 10, then that gives you per square foot. So that's only 2 wild oats per square foot. That's not a lot. But if you had that, you would look at if wild oats were one leaf stage ahead of the crop, ahead of the wheat, that'd be a 19% yield loss. If they are the same leaf stage as the wheat, then that's 11% yield loss. But if the wild oats are behind the wheat in staging, then your yield loss drops in half, or to less than half, down to 7%. So it's a huge difference in yield loss potential, just based on where the weeds are in staging in relative to the crop. So really we want our crop to be up ahead of the weeds for multiple reasons. So if you don't get a burn off, either pre or early post seeding, then you need to watch the staging in crop that you can safely apply your in crop herbicides. Sometimes by the times it's safe, some weeds are really big, and particularly some of our chemistries that we use in wheat, we're looking at the 3 to 4 leaf stage, depending on the broadleaf tank mixture that's going in there. Usually our graminicides are quite safe early on, but depending on the tank mix partner, you might be looking at waiting to a 3 leaf stage before you can safely apply. Now, we know we're looking at limited supplies of glyphosate and glufosinate. If you do skip a burn off ahead of a crop or you don't get any weed control done ahead of the crops that use those chemistries, you may need to spray those early to get the weeds before they get out of stage. Again, once the weeds get out of stage, they're harder to spray. The chemistry doesn't work as well. And so if you only get one shot at it and you go early, it's a long time to go before the canopy closes in. And a lot of us are only going to have one shot at it. Just with limited supplies, you're just going to get one spray and that's it. And so later flushes of weeds will get missed. If the weeds come later before that canopy closes, those are going to get missed. And we have been caught on this in years like this, where the weeds get ahead of the crop, they don't get out of there, and we end up with some really big weeds all through the year. Rescue treatments are possible in some crops, but usually they're very expensive, and by the time you go in and do a rescue treatment to take down some of that weed pressure, you've already lost yield. Your critical weed-free periods are different from crop to crop, but it's critical for all crops to keep them weed-free for as long as possible and very early on in their life cycle. So basically, I guess at the end of the day, the message is if the seeder is going, the sprayer should be going too. We just can't let those weeds get ahead of us. Thanks, Lionel.
Okay, thanks, Kim. And you're going to be hanging on here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so our next question, and this question is going to go to Timmy. Producers are starting to make decisions regarding changing cropping because of late seeding. Lots of corn and some soybean questions. Timmy, you've been asked normal corn heat units for typical growing seasons. Producers and agronomists want to know if there's still enough heat units for long season crop varieties. if seeding is delayed until or just before the beginning of June. So Timmy, I understand you have a few slides, so maybe we'll just hand the screen over to you.
Okay. Yeah, can you see my screen okay?
You bet.
Okay, great. Yeah, I got a few inquiry from a couple of producers and agronomists wanting to know if they still have enough 8 units for the long season crops, so the corn and soybean. So I created this map, and I'm glad and mentioned the fact that it's in the crop report, weekly crop report that Dane sent out yesterday. So if you have not read it, please take a look at it. It's also posted on our website. I included a link right here. And something important to note is that as the month progresses, we do accumulate more corn 8 units, more 8 units. So looking at the map to the left, May to September, in the Red River Valley, especially around areas Altona, Winkler, the maximum accumulation that we've seen May to September is from 2,700 to about 2,840. However, if there is a delayed start and it's from June, it's reduced by about 400 units. Now, that being said, the 400 units is not equally divided throughout the month of May. It's actually, you have more accumulation towards the end of May. So I really concur with what Anne said, that if you're able to get the seed in the ground over the next, let's say, week or so, you should still be okay in terms of, I'd say, the historical normal for the last week of June is that you'd accumulate another 150 thereabout. So if you had 150 to what you currently have for the map of from June, that would give you an indication of what you would expect to see. Now, again, knowing fully well that this goes up until September 30, there have been years when we do have the first fall frost happening much earlier, and a year like last year, we actually had the first fall frost occurring, I think towards the 2nd or 3rd week of October. So this should give guys an indication of what to see. And I thought I would also include the fact that, again, we've referenced this earlier. I think Lionel or Dennis referenced the fact that you can go to the seed guide to see the various varieties and what the 8 unit accumulation is. So this should give you an indication of just an idea if you still have enough 8 unit for the variety that you've selected to grow. And this is also in the seed guide, the Manitoba soybean variety maturity zones. So again, it's very important to know your zone, to know the amount of CHU that you would expect to see, and just understand the maturity zone and what you'll be growing. I also mentioned the fact that the first fall frost, it's important to note these dates as well. Now, this is just an average. Every year would be different, but for the most part, around the central region, the average date for the first fall frost occurs somewhere between September 21 and September 24. So you can use that to calculate if you have enough frost-free days for the crop you intend to grow. And I thought I would also just mention the fact that with soil temperature, this is the central and eastern region, we were increasing, the temperature was increasing fairly quickly, rapidly up until around May 9. And over the last week or so, it kind of stalled a little bit, and you can see the diurnal variation. So during the day when things warms up, you see the temperature rising, some location actually going as high as about 16 degrees. These are soil temperature probes buried at 2 inches. So for your seeding depth of about 1 inch, you'd actually expect the temperature to be slightly warmer than this. But at night, we do have those cooler temperature occurring at night. So this is at central and eastern, interlake and northwest, and finally the southwest region. But generally, the range I've seen for the most part is between 4 degrees and 12 degrees. Is what we expect to see. I should also mention that we have a fast-moving system today in terms of precipitation, bringing about ½ inch in some areas in the northwest region, and that's adding to almost more than 2-3 inches that the region had last week, Friday during the storm. and more rain expected again tomorrow in the Parkland area down to areas around Brandon, and possibility of wet snow. So hopefully we don't have as much as what is being forecasted as we've seen in the last few systems, where the forecast seemed to overestimate the amount that we'll be getting. I would expect that once the system moves out of the province into Northwest Ontario by Saturday, Friday, Saturday, we don't expect to see any significant precipitation next week throughout the province. There may be some slight drizzle on Tuesday, but most models are not showing any significant accumulation until probably Saturday, Sunday next week. Air temperature is generally going to stay around the mid-teens and 20s. So hopefully we actually get it warmer than that to dry up things and allow guys to be out in the field. So that's what I have, Lionel. I don't know if there's any question for me.
Hey, no, that was good to me. That's exactly what we're looking for. I think a lot of producers are starting to wonder about the later seeded crops or longer season crops, and I think that map is going to be important. Are you going to be updating that on a weekly basis, or?
Yeah, well, I don't plan to, but if there's a need to, I can definitely do that. Yep.
I was just wondering, even just until we get through kind of the next couple of weeks of seeding here, producers might be interested in seeing where they are when it comes time to making that decision.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can get another update for next week.
Great, thanks. Now I'm going to go through some of the questions that have been coming in, and so I got a question for Dave Kaminsky. With the cooler, wetter conditions that we seem to be having, what are your predictions for various seedling diseases, example, root rot?
Thanks, Lionel. May have mentioned this last week already, but the root pathogens that do well or hurt the crop the most when it's wet are Pythium and Phytophthora. Pythium feeds on the fine feeder roots and prunes them off. It's very difficult to see, but it can kind of hold back the crop from starting, or actually cause post-emergence damping off. This is cereals I'm talking about. Phytophthora is probably more of a concern on the broadleaf crop, like peas and soybeans. And once it gets going on the major root, it can actually work its way up the stem to cause problems later on. So those are the two I'd be most concerned about. Fusarium, which is always with us, thrives in both wet and dry conditions. And as a number of our crop specialists have mentioned, the cooler the soils, the longer it takes for crops to emerge, the longer time they spend underneath the soil, and of course they're more vulnerable until they get up and start photosynthesizing.
Okay, good. Thanks, David. Another question for Anne. Anne, are you still on the call?
I think Anne's gone.
She is? Okay.
Yeah.
Just a question that come up was back to the seeding rates, and the question was, are producers now looking at targeting lower yields? I think right now, I don't think anybody is making that decision yet. I think we're still in the midst of good planting season. We're definitely aren't late, and so I think a lot of producers are still making their plans to grow the cropping yield that they were expecting. If we get into June, I think we might start seeing some decisions being made as to maybe cutting back on some of the inputs, because the yields aren't going to be, the potential for some of the yields might not be there. So I think right now, I think most producers are still looking at doing growing the crop to get the maximum yield they can. Okay, we've got an event coming up, the Weeds Seedling Identification Day, and it's on June 2nd at the ACC campus in Brandon on the North Hill. And Kim, if you're still on, do you want to maybe give a little bit of an update as to what's going on here?
Yeah, thanks, Lionel. And yeah, so this is an event that we used to host in Carmen, and over the last couple of years that hasn't been possible with COVID, and ACC in Brandon now has had their greenhouse up and running for a while. They have a weed garden up there. So they have been doing a weed seedling identification day on their own over the last few years. And so we've decided to partner with them, and we're going to be having our weed seedling identification day there at the greenhouse. It'll start with a bit of a presentation on weed seedling ID and that type of thing. And then we go to the greenhouse and we'll have some weeds brought in from the field in pots like that we've dug up to identify. They have a weed garden there as well that has a good number of weeds in there. Those should be hopefully up and growing by June 2nd. It's funny how they grow really well in fields, but when you try to grow them to show them to people, they don't grow quite as fast or as good sometimes. But they do have a good selection, and so you will get a very good view of what's out there. It's just starting now. So that is June 2nd, starting in the morning, 9:30 to 12:30, and all are welcome. And if you want more information, you can contact myself, or you can contact Danielle Tichet. Her number is on the bottom of the screen there. And there is an online link to this as well, if you just Google that, or we can send that out. And also there's 2 CCA credits in crop management for this as well, for you people with your CCAs. Thanks.
Kim, while you're still on there, one question came in regarding I guess shortages of herbicide. Have you heard any comments, or do you have any comments regarding what you have heard? Are we still looking at tight situations, or what have you heard?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything new. I know we were going into the spring in very tight situations. I do believe the way, things have been allocated is that there should be enough chemistry, particularly for things like the glufosinate, the glyphosate. So that's our Liberty and our Roundup type products. There should be enough. Everybody should get enough for 1 spray. You might be able to get more for 2. I don't know. That's going to depend on your retailer. This is something that you really have to, be in a good relationship with your retailer. They'll have a really good idea of your needs, and they're doing their very best to get everybody the product that they need. We know those products in particular are very tight, but I would say all products are tight. So walk-up sales are going to be a little more difficult this year. I really strongly urge you to know what you need and book it, buy it, take it home, that type of thing. We've had a lot of just even transportation delays with all of the flooding and the road closures. And so a lot of things that hasn't helped this year. Now we are seeding later, so we're going to be needing these products a little bit later than we normally would. But again, expect everything to be in pretty tight supply, and you need to have your plan in place, and you need to make sure you've got the product you need when you need it. Make sure you've got that and get that on hand so you've got it. That's my advice for that.
Yeah, and I've been hearing quite a bit the same thing. This extended seeding season is definitely going to help, and it's probably going to help maybe more in the fertilizer part of the world as more fertilizer gets put in place, because just able to it's not leaving a lot of the dealerships right now, so we're able to build some stuff up. So I think regarding the fertilizer, again, it might be tight, but I think the logistics of getting it into place has definitely been helped by the later season for seeding. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Speaking of chemical, we looking at the field crop protection guide. It's available. It's available at all the MASC offices, our service centers. And also, if you're looking at a bulk order or a large amount order, there's Kim Brown's contact information. And again, give her a call, and she can definitely work it with you. Or if you're needing it more local, give any of us a call. Those are your ag adaptation specialists for the province. So give us a call. We can definitely help you in getting books or even telling you where you can find them. So definitely go that route. There's our livestock specialists. If you're still in situations where you're having pasture issues or you're having you have questions regarding any of the programs, definitely contact any one of these people. They'll, if they can't help you right away, they'll be able to find out the information for you and get it to you. There's the MASC offices and the numbers. So please contact them, especially as we're getting into the later season or seeding season here, and maybe you're making some changes to your seeding plans. Maybe you need to update your seeding plans. If you've got questions, contact the offices, and they'll be able to help you with your insurance. And if you've got general questions, there's the contact information from myself and Lori. Feel free to send us an email and we'll try to get you the answers. And please join us next week, May the 25th. Hopefully the weather smartens up and we're getting closer to 25 to 30% complete seeding. So see you next Wednesday.